bad way either. I just allude.
Your source for everything paranormal. Para X. The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Para X, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
Welcome to Stirring the Cauldron. Now, here's your host, Marla Brooks.
Hey, merry meet everybody, and welcome to Stirring the Cauldron here on the Para X Radio Network. Now, tonight we're going to be talking about crystal skulls with author and lecturer Nicholas Pearson. So the opening music, which was called Relics Uncovered by Midnight Syndicate, kind of fits the bill, even though it sounded a little creepy, because many crystal skulls are considered to be relics. Nicholas, however, is not a relic yet, but he has been involved with all kinds of the mineral kingdom, all aspects of the mineral kingdom for more than a couple of decades. And he studied mineral science at Stetson University and worked for several years at the Gillespie Museum, which is home to the largest mineral collection in the southern United States. And he says that stones and crystals are our most ancient teachers, and crystal skulls are one of his favorite topics. So, welcome, Nicholas. I'm kind of excited about this show because I love talking about crystal skulls myself.
Well, thank you so much for having me back, and so soon at that.
Well, you know, nobody gets tired of you. You're here by popular demand, so, that's a good thing. You just kind of get used to it because I know you've got a couple of books yet coming out, and, you'll be back.
All right.
But, I'm okay. So usually you do come when you have a new book. But, last time you were on, I don't even remember how the topic of crystal skulls came up. But you said they're near and dear to your heart. And like I said, I've always been intrigued by them and anxious to learn more and hear about them. And kind of, doing what I normally do, gleefully rubbing my hands together because we're going to talk about something very cool. So when and how did you get interested in crystal skulls?
I'd say it really started towards the end of my senior year in high school, which was, we'll just say, a number of years ago. And
I've already said you're not a relic, so don't worry.
I had read a book by Chris Thomas and Carrie Louise Morton. Chris Morton and Carrie Louise Thomas, I don't remember off the top of my head, The Mysteries of the Crystal Skulls, published by Pearson Company, an imprint of Inner Traditions. And it was really the only book commercially available on skulls at the time. Nothing else was in print. So I read it. I went to my very first wholesale gem and lapidary show, and I figured, okay, here's my chance to buy something half off. I just read a book on crystal skulls. Let's get one. And I was looking over these flats of fairly inexpensive carved crystal skulls from Brazil, and I really couldn't make up my mind, and my left brain was kicking in, and I wanted the most clear and perfect one that I could imagine. And instead, my hand just magnetically was drawn to this one that had these kind of unsightly inclusions. My little developing scientist mind wanted the perfect thing for my collection, and instead, magnetically, I had to pick this one. And when I lifted it up to eye level, he had this beautiful quartz crystal sort of embedded in the back of his skull. So that was manifestation crystal, if you will. And it was shaped just like a little Lemurian seed crystal, that unusual habit they have called a muso habit. And I had to take him home with me, all 1.5, maybe 2 inches of him. And he was a happy little guy. Maybe a month later, I was teaching a workshop on Lemurian seed crystals. And since this little tiny skull had this curious Lemurian crystal shaped inclusion, I had to take him along. And after class, a woman I've never met before comes up to me and she says, would you mind if I sat with your skull? I said, sure, or why not? So she's holding him and proceeding to give me intuitive information about this little tiny skull. And little known to me, she had done a lot of work with a skull named Max, who is one of those purportedly ancient skulls who really gets around. And she's telling me that this skull is somehow connected to Max, and she gives me a name for him and everything. And I'm thinking, sure, right, And not even 2 weeks later, I'm teaching the same class in a new space. I've never been to this county before. It's almost an hour north of my hometown, and I'm in a circle full of strangers. And when I pull this little skull out of my pocket at the same moment in the workshop, the man immediately to my left, I remember clear as day, almost imperceptibly, almost inaudibly under his breath, he goes, Max? Inquisitively. And naturally, at the end of the workshop, he comes up to me and says, so I was wondering if I could see my skull. Sure, absolutely. Go ahead and sit with him. And he gives me the same name, the same connection to Max. He says that he could hear the same sound psychically as when he was in the presence of Max. And I'm thinking, okay, maybe there's something to this. And my love affair with the crystal skulls really took hold that night.
Wow. And was there, I mean, did you particularly go and check on that, or I mean, that's enough to get you hooked anyway, but I mean, did you do some more? Did you do more?
You know, it's a modern carving, so obviously it's not from the same place or carved by the same people as Max. There might be some special connection between the two of them, but ultimately the way I think of it is all of the skulls kind of communicate along this network, a membrane, if you will. And it doesn't matter if it's a newly carved skull or one that's not so newly carved. They all kind of work on the same platform, like having an internet. And once we carve any mineral into this crystal skull shape, then they're connected to that network. That's why a lot of people have these very ancient, mystifying experiences with very recently carved skulls. And that's also why some skulls that were once thought to be old and have been later on proven not to be can still give us that same impression. It's because they're drawing from the same collective field of consciousness, of memory, of energy.
That's the wonderful mystery about all of these. Can you give some, in case people don't know, do you have a little bit of backstory into the history of the crystal skulls, when they were first made, or when people first started noticing it, maybe in this day and age, because they've been around for, a long, long time.
Yeah. So, this is kind of murky territory because there are a lot of conflicting stories here. And whenever I approach a topic as sensitive as this, I try to be mindful of the fact that none of us living today have all of the facts. And neither did the people who claimed to have found these things. So we have to be as unbiased as possible. And so far as I can tell, there is no master set of 12 or 13 or 35 or 92 or 874 crystal skulls that exists. This was a myth that came about probably in the 80s. And we can talk about that in a little bit and just focus on the skulls themselves. There are very few, if any, that have really come from sanctioned, documented archaeological digs. The only ones that have are very small, like amulet-sized, mostly out of rock quartz, sometimes out of greenstone like jade or serpentine.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes, ancient people couldn't discern between true jade and things that were only vaguely the same color or texture. So
Right.
modern archaeologists often call these social jades because although they weren't geologically jade, they had the same social, spiritual, cultural association as jade. I actually have a very small greenstone masquette in the shape of a skull face that's from southwestern Mexico. That may be anywhere from 12 to 1800 years old, and it's currently on loan to a museum. So we know that these are things that have been around for a while. There are a whole lot that appear to have been found. Of course, the vast majority not on sanctioned digs, so we don't have a whole lot of way to sort of vet or prove their provenance. But we're talking artifacts that come from the Himalayas, from the sort of Pacific Islands even. There's one called Synergy that's supposed to come from the Pacific Islands. At least one is rumored to have come from Africa and spent at least a significant amount of time there, making it older than the current interest in crystal skulls has been. Plenty have been found throughout the Americas. There are a couple that I've heard of coming from Europe as well. So, all over the place. I'd wager if we look everywhere hard enough, we're going to find some sort of rock shaped like our own face, whether it's with or without flesh. And that's because, this is a universal symbol, especially when they strip us down and have no flesh. We all pretty much look the same, and unless you're a forensic anthropologist or someone else who's equally as trained, it's really hard to tell the difference between male, female, young, old, Asian, Caucasian. It doesn't matter. This is something very primal, very visceral, and totally, totally universal. We all have to have a skull. If you don't, then you have some pretty big problems. So, it kind of takes us to that real core of what being human is all about.
Now, okay, so why do you think people started carving out skulls? I know what the thought processes are now and why we, what we think of them and what we use them for and all that, but why do you think that was something that they decided to do?
I have a theory that I haven't really discussed very much publicly.
Yay.
If we look at the work of archaeologists like Maria Gimbutas and other people who were studying this sort of what she called Old Europe, everything from the late Paleolithic through the Mesolithic to the early Neolithic, we find these really similarly carved images of mostly goddesses, but also gods, and then later, ordinary human beings. But we notice that, back when human civilization was at its most primitive, it took a lot of effort to produce art. So art was reserved for sacred things because it was that much work. And if we look at the earliest depictions of the Great Mother, she's virtually always faceless or wearing what appears to be a mask. And there's a particular emanation of this sort of prototypic goddess that is sometimes referred to as the White Lady, the stiff nude, the mother of bone. And, she's bony, if you will, thin, not as corpulent and fertile looking as those Venuses, like the Venus of Willendorf, and virtually always devoid of facial features, maybe the suggestion of eyes and a nose and a line around the perimeter of her face like she's wearing a mask. And these are often carved out of white stone, pale marble, maybe also bone. So there is this association between the color white, this sort of otherworldly reality. We think of white as good and black as bad today. White being living in life and warmth, and black being decay and death and darkness. But it was actually the opposite in the ancient world. Black was the color of rich, fertile soil. You could grow things in it. And white was the color of winter, of bone. So these were, not the friendliest of things. So I think maybe the very first crystal skull was taking that sort of prototype of the mother of bones mask, the guardian of death, and carving it into something a little bit more lifelike, but still not suggesting a specific face. Because, the goddess, the god, the divine is unknowable, is ineffable to our finite human minds and our tiny little earthly perspectives. So, the first crystal skull may have been a way of personifying death and eternal life all in one.
Mm-hmm. It's funny. Someone in the chat room, Christine, I think, said she's got her 7 crystal skulls lined up to listen to the broadcast tonight.
That's so sweet. I brought out three of my crew as well to be present with me.
There you go. And a minute ago you mentioned the numbers, and I did look up the old Native American legend about the existence of the 13 skulls, the life-size human skulls. Mm-hmm. And for those that don't know, they were big skulls made of rock crystal that were said to speak and sing. And according to legend, these skulls contain answers to some of the greatest mysteries of life and the universe. And it said one day, at a time of great crisis for humanity, all of these skulls are going to be rediscovered and brought back together again to reveal their knowledge and information that is going to be vital to the very survival of the human race. So, when Christy just said she has her 7 lined up, I'm going, I wonder where the other 6 are. But this one's a very common legend, isn't it?
It is. And, as near as anyone can tell, the first time this legend ever appeared in print was in a book published in 1986 by Kenneth Meadows called The Medicine Way. And in it, he got this information from a man by the name of Harley Swift Deer, who claimed to be a Native American medicine man, but also didn't really have anything to back that up. And we'll save that discussion for someone who's more qualified about it than me. But let's just say this man made a lot of claims that couldn't be backed up. And he was also the first one to publicly discuss this legend of the 13 crystal skulls, which he said when they came together were something called the Ark of Osirikonwea, or something along those lines. And in it, he described how sort of the elder spirits or gods or, the Great Spirit had created one each of these crystal skulls for the 12 planets that carried human or human-like life, including the Earth. And each of them was sort of a repository of the sum knowledge of all of these planets, and that of them, Earth was the youngest. And then there was a master skull that when brought together, would unlock it all. But, there are a few problems with this. One, if these are supposed to be things gifted to the youngest planet, then why would the youngest planet already have one of these skulls that was supposed to have the sum total of all of the wisdom that we haven't even gained yet? Another was, of course, the problem of, where are these skulls really coming from? Why would they be on Earth in a physical sense? There were a number of holes there, and let's just say that he led a colorful enough life as to attract the wrong kind of attention from the wrong crowd. So a lot of his things have kind of been debunked, we'll say. But this idea of the 13 crystal skulls has stuck around. There are quite a number of other crystal skull lovers that have really sort of latched onto this, that it's become embedded in our cultural collective psyche. And I think that there may be a seed of truth that while it may not exist in the physical, there may not be a master set of 13 physical skulls that were carved as the prototype of all others. I think there may be this sort of spiritual blueprint, an etheric set of 13 skulls that served as the prototype for, maybe human consciousness, not just these physical artifacts of crystal skulls, but, maybe even was preparing the earth to receive what would become human beings.
Yeah, well, and the idea when I was reading that, I thought, well, that's really great because it may be myth, it may be legend, but I don't think I'm the only one that believes this, but we are in crisis right now. I mean, we're just kind of slowly falling apart. And the thought that maybe there was such a thing, wouldn't that be lovely? We would sit down and get the wisdom and know how to fix things instead of kind of floundering around and, keep going deeper down the rabbit hole in a sense.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly don't want to, pull out that rug of hope out from under anyone's feet. Just because a legend might not be literally true doesn't mean that there isn't some sort of symbol that's there. Exactly. And, because it's been, like a game of telephone, it's been shared so many times that it has changed shape and meaning over the years. There's so many different different variations on this legend now that it really has become, of mythic proportion. I think one of my favorite versions was propagated by a man by the name of Vic Benilus. He was a psychic archaeologist, if you will, and found a handful of small crystal skulls that he claimed were Aztec in origin off the coast of Florida. He'd found part of a treasure trove that once belonged to Hernan Cortez, mostly a whole bunch of emeralds. But the version of the myth that he got was that there were 12 crystal skulls that would be united around what he called the Emerald of Judgment, a very large, flawless, natural crystal of emerald. And the emerald itself has been recovered, and some of the skulls have been. And, it would just be really fun to see if there ended up being 12 of them altogether.
It would be. It's just really amazing when you look. I mean, when I was looking for pictures for the banner, even just wanted something as a backdrop to you, and I couldn't believe how many beautifully carved, different material crystal skulls there are. Because most people think of crystal skulls as being clear or maybe milky, kind of like white quartz or something.
Right.
But they aren't the only ones, in case somebody doesn't know, that are labeled crystal skulls. I mean, the picture I used on the show banner this week was a skull made of an amethyst geode and dinosaur agate. And, I was looking at others, some that are gorgeous. Ammonite, is that how you say it? Ammonite fossil, lace agate, and this kind of was like an oxymoron to me, but I found an African petrified wood crystal skull. And I guess the wood petrified so much that it kind of turned into a stone. And that was absolutely beautiful. So it seems like any gem or any stone or even petrified wood could be labeled as a crystal skull, correct?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a handful of things that are non-crystalline that kind of get lumped in this category. Obsidian, for example, has no crystal structure, but it's still of geologic origin. Same with opal. And they all kind of tap into the same collective field. Once carved into the shape, especially once the eyes are finished, they sort of take on that, what's called the morphogenetic field, that sort of collective energy of the blueprint of a crystal skull, and because of that they exchange information. What's really fun about this process is because we are carving new materials into crystal skull form on a daily basis as a race, that means that we are almost like uploading new USB drives to this network. So the natural memory recorded in these stones becomes a part of the collective consciousness of these skulls.
Absolutely. I'm going to ask the chat room, because I know Christine has 7 lined up. Just give me a number, guys. Who's got skulls? Who's got crystal skulls? I'm just curious to see how many do. And in the meantime, how many do you have, Nicholas?
Oh,
all told. Do you have enough fingers and toes to count them?
I don't. I know that much. I haven't counted in a while. My newest addition to the family came just a few weeks ago, and it's also of petrified wood. This one being Indonesian petrified wood. He's huge. He's like 12 plus pounds, and it's very primitively carved. And he was just immediately had this charming smile on his face, and the price was right. So I said, "You're coming home with me."
That, I mean, that's the thing. Is it kind of, all right, so I collect little Hotai figurines, and some of them aren't so little, the Laughing Buddhas, and I love the porcelain ones and, whatever. But I'm really fussy about the faces, because, I mean, they run the gamut. I kind of like the ones maybe from the 40s and the 50s, but they have to have a specific face or I don't want it, which is terrible, terrible to be a Hotai snob. But does the same thing go for you collecting the skulls? Do they have to have a specific look to them, or do you also get them by being drawn to them by feel?
It's a mixture of both. Admittedly, there are some tools that I've added to my toolbox merely because I was checking a box on the list. Ooh, a lepidolite skull would be great. I could use a really big rose quartz skull. But more than anything, if I'm making a decision, especially if it's a larger investment, it's got to be because my heart and soul are bonded to that skull. And, that has sometimes meant putting very large things on layaway for a good amount of time. And other times it's just been, a little tiny addition to the collection I just couldn't say no to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. It's just like, it followed you home. Can I keep it? It wanted to get me. Now, okay, Christine, she has some really neat ones. She says she has 2 quartz, 1 ocean jasper, 1 red obsidian, 1 labradorite, 1 fluorite, and 1 stone with its head of hair, a cluster of quartz. Now, that sounds pretty cool, huh?
Yeah, I've seen those guys.
A hairy skull. It's nice. But yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of important to also, let's talk about the symbol of the skull and what it represents, because it's used in so many ways. But I mean, basically, and jump right in here, the skull deals with communication because it has a mouth. It deals with intelligence because it represents a brain. And I think that's kind of the 2 basic things about the symbol of the skull, but I know you've got more to say about that.
Oh, yeah. How many hours do we have left?
Oh, plenty of time. Go for it.
All right. So, on the basic level, we've all got a skull. Therefore, we're all really personally invested in this image of the skull. It is a universal symbol of humankind. It's an almost impersonal on a level because we're stripping away that idea of the ego mind, our own personal visage, our face, our flesh. And part of that process, of course, is embracing the mortality of it all. I mean, a skull doesn't reveal itself while someone is still alive, we hope. So, we have to recognize that any skull symbol is a symbol of mortality. This was a motif that was especially popular in Victorian Europe with the Latin expression memento mori, remember that I shall die. And this wasn't meant to be a really morbid thing. Instead, it was, sort of like the reasoning behind carpe diem. Why should you seize the day? Well, because you might not have another one. So invest yourself in it. Another part of the whole mortality thing is recognizing that your physical body is impermanent. It will break down. There's no 2 ways about that. If you haven't been clued into this yet, I'm sorry to be that guy. But you're going to die. You will. Your soul, however, does not. There is a piece of you that does not decay. And so let's look at this juxtaposition of this symbol about our own death, decay, destruction, our own finite amount of time here on the plane. Well, if you take that and carve it out of something that's not organic, like a bone that does break down, but instead carve it out of something that is very stable, like quartz. Quartz is resistant to all but the most intense acids. It's very temperature stable. It's very durable. If you can carve something into quartz, it's going to last in eternity. So we have this thing that embraces both our ephemerality and our eternal quality of the soul. So the crystal skull's there to remind us that there's a piece of us that doesn't die, that doesn't break down, that doesn't decay. And instead of being sort of misidentified with our body, with our ego, with our personal identity, we can look at that transpersonal identity and look at our soul and look at the depth of our consciousness. That doesn't break down. So it is a constant from every incarnation, from every moment, from every breath, every heartbeat, and even in the times when we don't have breath or heartbeats. So working with skulls helps take us into that space of the eternal. It crosses the threshold from our ordinary consciousness into our spiritual consciousness.
Yeah, that's very true. I've got a question from the chat room. She says, crystal skulls are often said to have paranormal phenomenon attached to them, and also claims of healing or supernatural powers and producing a variety of miracles. Do you think their creator put the magic in them with intent, or does the shape of the skull draw power, because it is a skull, does it draw power into itself?
I think there are a lot of factors to look at. I mean, first and foremost, if we look at the most famous claims that surround some of the more famous skulls that are out there, like the Mitchell Hedges skull, it is a large, very nearly flawless piece of quartz. That could be carved into just about any shape and still have some really interesting phenomena around it. if it were used with the right conscious intention. So in that sense, we could get weird phenomena irrespective of it being a skull, a natural crystal, an amorphous hunk, if it were, that quality of quartz crystal. On the other hand, we do have that, amount of intention that had to go into it. Plus, we have the expectation or the belief or the, personal investment of the people who are experiencing those phenomena. We're talking about skulls that are changing color and clarity, that appear to change their density and sometimes way more or less than others. And these are things I've experienced with the skulls in my own collection. I have a skull in my skull family by the name of Mustang. He comes from the Himalayan mountains, and he's about 1,500 years old. Oh. And, I took him to a really unusual place down in South Florida called the Coral Castle. You can check that out sometime. It's really fun to learn about its history. This little tiny man built it without, modern tools and moved massive things that weighed like 10 tons all by himself, all at night with no one watching. But the energy there is really zingy, we'll say. And in the light of the setting sun, which was this glorious gold, I snapped a photo of Mustang, and he had turned this brilliant gold color. It was ordinarily kind of a whitish piece of quartz. And he stayed that golden color for months until I received my next very old skull, who was carved out of golden calcite from Mongolia. And the day I unwrapped this package, took the gold skull out of the box and set him next to Mustang, Mustang was white again. So, we do get these weird phenomena with the crystal skulls. And I think part of it is just the fact that they're crystal. The other part of it, especially with the older ones, is that there is this accumulation of energy when they're passed from generation to generation, or incubated in the earth, or kept in the vicinity of people who want to do ceremony with it or meditate with it, or treat them like sacred, reverent beings.
Now, are singing and screaming skulls and crystal skulls pretty much the same thing, but maybe just louder, more vocal, perhaps? Or, because people confuse them. We hear of singing, we hear of screaming skulls because that's, Halloween. You always hear about the screaming skull. But the singing ones are kind of neat. And so what's the difference between the three?
So, I hear a lot of terms that I think can be kind of used fairly interchangeably. Originally, the expression singing skull or talking skull referred to ones that had articulated mandibles. So they were two separate pieces, like the Mitchell Hedges skull, like a more recently uncovered skull called Compassion, which may be of African in origin. That was what was originally meant by these singing skulls. It was supposed to be the hallmark of those master set of 12 or 13 skulls. That's not easy to carve by hand, just because it's easy to slip and break something, not necessarily because the grain of the quartz has anything to do with it at all. And so those were the original ones that got those monikers, but then, it became kind of en vogue, if you will, to carve skulls with permanently open mouths. Instead of having an articulated mandible that you can break or lose, you can have it all in one piece but still have an open mouth. And then they started to sort of stylize those and make them look a little bit more outrageous, a little bit more hyperbolic. And I think that's where the laughing skull or the screaming skull kind of came out. I think any of them with an open mouth, whether it's a separate mandible or not, gives us this relatability. It looks like it's ready to take in breath and expel sound. So they tend to be a little bit louder energetically, we could say. But that's not a guaranteed phenomenon. I've worked with very tiny, very crudely carved skulls all in one piece that certainly had an energy that sang more loudly than large skulls with articulated mandibles.
Okay. Do you think that that what the skulls are made of dictates how powerful they are, as opposed to maybe the intent that may or may not have been put into them before they were created? I mean, would carnelian stone work differently than jade, that kind of thing?
This is kind of an interesting question because it's something that's based on subjective experience. We don't have any sort of equipment that can definitively state this stone is more powerful than that stone. So I tend to believe that the skulls that have higher quality materials are going to produce more intense energies around them. That's not always the case. I mean, you look at Max, and he's not gem quality quartz, and yet Max has a big personality, a big energy. He's very well known, he's very well loved, and he does really great things. And then you can look at, some modern skulls that are made out of flawless material, and energetically they're just kind of dead. Maybe asleep would be a better way to put it. So the missing piece of the equation certainly is that sort of conscious intention, but I don't think it necessarily finds that the critical moment is in its production, but instead in a state or a process called activation. Activation is what sort of flips the light switch on and brings that consciousness into the skull.
Yeah, because, I was sitting there thinking, and I thought, okay, well, suppose somebody decided to make a crystal skull out of hematite, for example. And we all know that hematite is a good healing stone. So then I got to thinking, well, would a hematite skull be better for healing than a carnelian or a jade or, something like that? Do they go, I wonder if people get certain skulls because of the property of the material that they're made of. Have you heard of that? Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, we can't separate, we can't divorce the energy of the mineral that it's made from the skull itself. The two have to work together. One may override the other at different times, but certainly a skull carved from tourmaline is going to feel different than one carved from amethyst.
Yeah.
Even though they tap into the same collective skull consciousness, we still have to consider the substrate from which they're made, and that no change on the exterior. Whether we're carving it into a wand, a skull, a sphere, a cup, anything can change that molecular arrangement, nor the chemistry that goes into making any particular mineral or rock. So that part of it remains unchanged. It's a base frequency that is part of the crystal skull's total frequency.
Okay. Question from chat. Do the skulls react to one another or interact?
Yes, they really do.
You smiled when you said that. I heard that smile in your voice. Yeah.
Yeah. So there is this sort of synergistic effect that occurs. When we start working with skulls in quantity, whether it's a small quantity or a large quantity, it's not merely additive. We don't just get 3 skulls and say, okay, this is one energy field plus another energy field plus another energy field. It is multiplicative. It is exponential. This is something that really activates. And certainly there are some formations that we can arrange them in that are a little bit more, we'll say, intense than others, but the skulls just on their own, they're so willing to communicate with one another. They don't have the kind of perception of boundary the way we do, just because they are occupying separate coordinates in physical space and don't have physical forms that are attached to one another. They don't experience distance the way we do. So it's very easy to get them to interact with one another. And a really great thing that we can do if we have the opportunity to visit a very old skull, or even just a very active skull, is to bring our own skulls with us and let them do their thing. We don't have to consciously direct it. We certainly can if we know what we're doing, or at least if we are willing to follow the guidance of the skulls. And we can experience some really amazing things. For instance, my dear friend Sharon Britton, who has a store in North Central Florida called the High Springs Emporium, a few times a year we get together to do these events that she calls the Galactic Skull Activations, and she does them all over the place. But she has this amazing being who is carved out of Russian Lemurian quartz, which is also called Sacred Scribe quartz. And the skull is larger than life-sized. She goes by the name Silver. And Silver sort of gave Sharon the template by which to perform these activations. And it's very, very simple, very meditative kind of ceremony, but we gather the skulls together for this. And it's like calling down the star beings, the spirits of our, cosmic ancestors, to work through the skulls, because the skulls, in a sense, are dimensional doorways. And so it gives these beings that don't have physical forms like us a means of connecting to us in a very real, tangible way. So those skulls that have already been through the activation process can sort of hold space for those that haven't. So even though a skull's already been through it, if they participate with the others, we sort of magnify the efficacy of it. They're so joyful in the way that they share with one another. We could certainly learn something from them.
Is it important if somebody gets a crystal skull for them to activate it and communicate with it as opposed to just putting a pretty skull or two up on the shelf? I mean, they probably rebel, don't they, if you don't pay attention to them or acknowledge or talk to them? What?
I'd wager if you're sensitive enough to know the reasons why you might be attracted to a crystal skull, you're probably sensitive enough to have an idea that you'll need to do more than just sit it on a pretty shelf. I don't think there's anything wrong with doing that. I have a colleague, Yap Van Etten, who calls the crystal skulls sort of like the lazy man's way of creating energy fields. They'll do nearly all the work for us if we just invite them to, which is fantastic. But when we do want to participate as equal co-creators, then really we get a whole different effect. You get out what you put into it. And I think that's true of everything in life, not just work with stones, not just work with the crystal skulls in particular. But, our interpersonal relationships are the same. So if you really want to have this sort of transformational experience, then spend time with your skulls. Sit with them in meditation. You can do these sort of activation procedures, whether it's a ceremony like Sharon and I do together, or like she does all up and down the eastern seaboard of the U.S. It can also be something that takes place in sort of the astral plane, or on those inner realm planes where we just meet the skulls in meditation and follow their lead.
Mm-hmm. So what do people generally call on the skulls for? Wisdom, healing, divination, or maybe just sitting and listening and seeing what gets directed their way?
All of the above. Crystal skulls are really powerful healers of karma because they represent this sort of collective consciousness. They also can heal our collective karma. They're great for ancestral or genealogical karma for that reason. As far as like divination or psychic experience goes, they really are magnifiers. On the one hand, we of course already doing that job of amplification and cohering the energy, but the shape of the skull and that resemblance to our own sensory organs really accelerates that. So we can use them as dimensional doorways, whether it's forward or past in time, whether it is sort of into parallel realities, or opening up to other cosmic potentials that are out there. Since they are these sort of portals, they can be the doorway or the gateway through which higher energies come to the planet Earth. They give us that clear connection. They give us almost like a better awareness of soul on the everyday world. Because that we can use them for healing ourselves, for others, the earth itself. There are a lot of crystal skulls that are so deeply connected to the earth that we can use them for earth healing. And then, the ideas of what they can do are just limitless.
Suppose somebody just sees one. They're looking through a yard sale or something and they see it. They have no clue what it's all about, but they want to take it home because it's spooky, right? Ooh, this will be good for Halloween, that kind of thing. So if they're completely oblivious to what the crystal skull could do, could it, even without being activated by that person, could it kind of activate itself in a sense and have some meaning to the person that gets it? Or does it, can it kind of like, walk up behind him and slap it and say, hey, listen, I'm not just a pretty skull here. I mean, what I'm trying to get at. I mean, will somebody that doesn't have any clue at all be affected by it, even if they don't know what it is?
More than likely, yes. One of my friends, Marion Webb DeSisto, who's got a couple of books that talk about the skulls, she calls them the harbingers of change. Usually when we adopt this energy into our life, whether it is on a conscious or unconscious passive or active level, having the crystal skulls around you is going to initiate subtle levels of change, if not really big, obvious levels of change. And for many of us that start working with a skull, it rarely stays singular. We tend to grow these families. And that's my excuse, and I'm sticking to it. They really do so much work behind the scenes. It's possible that you're going to get a skull that's already fairly active for any number of reasons. Maybe it came from someone, or came from a shop, or came from a carver who treated it so well that it kind of brought it into that state of alignment. Maybe it's gone through an activation procedure with other skulls, or been in the presence of an ancient skull. Maybe it's just that lucky skull that was next in line, and when the chain of dominoes went, it lit up and got activated. So we don't always have to consciously participate in this activation process. I think part of the idea of doing these things is just about activating us as much as it is about activating the skulls. But if you start working with these energies, because they are so archetypal in a sense, you can't avoid the transformation that will come to you.
Well, that's what I was thinking. And, it wouldn't be such a subtle change that you wouldn't notice. You would notice maybe over time, or maybe it would just be something, wow, all of a sudden the epiphany, the light bulb goes over your head. At that point, suppose, all right, so I'm asking all the basic, dumb questions, but suppose somebody has 2 or 3 skulls. All right. And they're clueless. They just have them up there because they're pretty, or they think they're spooky for Halloween. And a change starts to occur, and they do start to feel it. Okay, first of all, they're going to go and blame everything else around them. They're not going to think it came from the skulls. But eventually, when all else fails, or somebody says, look, you've got that skull up there. Maybe that's where it's coming from, or there's a group of them. How could a person decide, let's say you have 3, how would you know which one might be the one that's doing it? Or would it be a collective of the 3 because they're together? If somebody's finally waking up to this, what would they do to try to kind of harness things? If things were going good or changing or something, and they're starting to feel it, how would they pick of the 3 which did it, or would they know?
We're all different. Our skulls are all different, although there are these sort of universal threads. I think we'd have to look at that case by case. Chances are, if you've got more than one, you may already have a working relationship with one in particular. I mean, I have Mustang over here, who is kind of in charge of the family, and me, for that matter. When I connect, I can almost hear this running dialogue. He literally speaks to me in this sort of spiritual sense that I hear with my inner hearing, not my physical ears. So I have a really conscious relationship, and I can get that feedback in real time. Even if we're separated by distance at times, his voice will pop in and say, no, left instead of right, or yes instead of no, or whatever it might be. But if you're not on that level with your skulls, chances are your heart is going to lead you in the right direction. Maybe it is all 3 of them. Maybe it is 2 out of 3. Maybe it's just that one. It could be the biggest. It could be the first. It could be your favorite stone. Whichever it is, you'll know, and you can trust that.
All right, let's talk about trust for a minute. In nature, in the world, there is the black and white, the good, the bad, the yin, the yang. So is it possible that you might be attracted to a particular skull, and when you get it home, you find that it's not a benevolent skull, that it may not like you, or whatever? I mean, there has to be that chance. I mean, not all skulls can be 100% buddy and looking out for you. There may be a renegade or a maverick in the bunch, right?
Well, in like mythological and folkloric archetypes, we have this sort of archetype of the trickster, the walker between the worlds, the magician. They all kind of wear the same face, even the messenger. And in a sense, I think all of the skulls have the opportunity to walk that liminal zone where they aren't really malevolent, but they don't always appear to be beneficent either. And it's not because it's about good or bad, but they're trying to shake up our perception of duality. If we look at the skull, it is literally a juxtaposition of opposites. It is, ephemeral life versus eternal life. It is death and decay versus indestructibility. It is dark versus light. And so even this idea of good and bad, virtually any skull is going to work on challenging. And, sometimes it's going to happen in really playful, mischievous kind of ways. Otherwise, it's going to be total bliss. And then you might also have your life feel like it is crumbling apart at your fingertips, and you just don't know why. And that's not because the skull is necessarily trying to do anything harmful, but it's just about evolution. We are, as a race, as a planet, we are on the precipice of immense change. As rapidly as we have grown up to this point, we can't imagine what the next step is going to look like. It will be that monumental. And we can either evolve or die. We can transform or we can not. And the skulls are here to help us. They're, on the one hand, reminding us about that whole paradigm of evolve or die. But on the other, they're the stepping stones, they're the tools, the way showers and guides to help us make that transition. And if we begin to work with them really wholeheartedly, if we open up to them, we're going to experience growth that we can't fathom. And sometimes that's really uncomfortable. Sometimes it means packing all of your things in storage and thinking that you're going to move to another country and then deciding you shouldn't. Not that I'm speaking from personal experience or anything. It is really humbling to be around these skulls, ancient, modern, or in between. They really change us from the inside out.
Well, that doesn't hurt, because I think from time to time we all need to change. We need to change our perceptions. We need to change our actions. We need to change our thought processes. Sorry. And if we have something like that around that will aid and assist, I think that's a plus. But then, somebody's going to say, well, I'm going to get one that's going to haunt me in the middle of the night. It's going to wake me up. It's going to hover over my bed. It's going to scare the hell out of me, that kind of thing. Right. And maybe, all right, but that leads to another quick question. Spirits will inhabit objects. They possess people. They jump into other objects. Have you ever come across a crystal skull that has a spirit in it that, just is kind of taking up residence temporarily? Or do maybe the skulls don't allow that?
There's a fair amount of circumstantial evidence, as well as, we'll call it oral tradition. I think that's the nice way we can describe this, where, one of the perceived functions of the old skulls was that they were meant to house these sort of ancestral spirits, whether they were distant ancestors or, the previous keeper of the skull, when they passed, would have their consciousness transferred to it. And because they are these sort of dimensional doorways, they work as portals through which other beings can contact us, whether we want to call those ETs or ancestors or the gods. I'm sure every culture has used different language to get there. They certainly can. I've only met one old artifact that really had this sort of, I don't want to use the word haunted, but haunted kind of appearance to it, energetically speaking. And I was at a conference in Minneapolis, Minnesota, when I met this particular skull, and it was, under an acrylic dome, so no one would get too close and personal, but it was an Aztec carving, and it really, it wasn't a gemmy crystal or anything like that. It was a black rock, maybe basalt, and it certainly, it had someone hanging around it, we'll say.
Yeah, that's the politically correct answer to that, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And we can cleanse that just like we can cleanse anything else. And we just have to gauge whether or not that is the appropriate action to take. Trust your higher guidance, consult a professional. We should cleanse our crystals anyway if we're really going to be doing intimate work with them, whether they're in the shape of a wand or a skull. That part doesn't matter. So it's always nice to cleanse your crystals. Your skulls will thank you if they are activated or do have these sort of helpful tag-alongs with them. Those things won't be dismissed by by using
Cleansing.
sage or salt or
good.
water or sound.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask. I mean, you don't want to sterilize it completely if you
Right.
know. Okay, so that can't be done. That's great. All right, really, one more quick question. If someone is interested in finding a skull, purchasing a skull, what's the best way to go about choosing? And I think I already know what you're going to say, but what's the best way about choosing the right one for them?
In the days of the internet, you can find everything if you look hard enough.
Mm-hmm.
So, you can be very prescriptive and say, I really love the energy of rhodochrosites, or rhodochrosite skull should be my first one. But you might hold that rhodochrosite skull and not connect and pick up, the humble rose quartz, or, maybe that really heavy hematite skull and go, oh my gosh, I can't put this down. It was like me with my very first little skull. It was not the one I wanted, but it wanted me, and I continue to work with that little guy to this day. So look for that heart-based connection. Yeah. The skulls don't have egos, and they try to connect with us on a level that supersedes the ego, and you'll feel it. There's no denying that.
Yeah, that's the best way. When you feel it in your heart, it'll find you. If that's the one for you, it'll find you too. All right, we are about ready to go. So tell everybody where they can find out more about you and the books and everything, and because your website's kind of really neat.
Yeah, so to start with, if you'd like to learn more about the crystal skulls, I do discuss them briefly in the 7 archetypal stones in Chapter 6. They also make their way into Chapter 4 of Crystals for Karmic Healing. So although I have not yet written my magnum opus about the skulls, it's coming one day.
Yes,
you can still read a little about them. But you can check out where I've been and where I'm going on my publisher's website, which is innertraditions.com. You can also visit my website directly, which is www.theluminouspearl.com. There's even a contact form, so you can ask me tons of crystal skull related questions or questions about anything else within reason. And I frequent the Central Florida area, which is my home turf, to teach workshops, and I have a couple coming up on crystal skulls over the next couple months. So stay tuned. If you're local or want to visit, we can play with the skulls together. Exciting.
And thank you for being open enough that people can come to you with questions, because a lot of people just don't want to be bothered, but education is an important thing. So thank you for being so receptive, really.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It really is.
And thank you for being here tonight. And I want to thank everybody else who's been listening in, and those who are going to be listening on the podcast as well. So we are out of here, but we hope to see you back soon. And until next time, everybody, blessed be and merry meet again. Good night.
This has been another edition of Stirring the Cauldron with Marla Brooks. Be sure to tune in next week at this same time for another great guest and more cauldron stirring. Any rebroadcast or other use of this program without explicit permission is strictly prohibited. Copyright 2014. Moonlight Hall by Kevin MacLeod, licensed through Incompetech.com.